Thank you for joining the session, and I do note that I have a slightly bad manners here by presenting some things that has been just published, like in my excuse, David asked for it. So this is a paper on digital currency design, and to give a little bit of a background for the paper, it kind of started in 2020. In collaboration with the Bank of Canada, because they were seeking some independent academic views about how to design a central bank digital currency. But what this paper is doing is rather making an argument about how a central bank digital currency ideally should look like. But the same argument would apply for like its alternatives as well. So in case one wants to use like a stable coin or like some cryptocurrency or like some other alternative payment systems, and the same economic mechanism for the desirable features would be desirable as well. Okay, and as a motivation was central bank digital currencies, the countries are still like around the world thinking about it. Like, of course, like we are in Europe, European Central Bank is famously still considering launching one. Bank of Canada has somewhat at least stopped or withdrawn from the idea of issuing CBDC at the moment, but there is a lot of thinking around the world. And one of the key questions about CBDCs that anybody would ask is like, is it why to issue one at all, and what does it mean? So there are at least two choices here. Like one can think of as one that is in the focus of this paper, the so-called retail CBDC, that is something that individuals and human beings would be using, while a wholesale CBDC, like one can think of it as like more efficient payment rails, which is not concerning individual citizens that much. It is to make things more efficient within financial institutions. So what this paper focuses on is retail CBDC or its private sector issued alternatives, be it crypto, or be it technology firms that issue something like that. And then, of course, like some people that are skeptical about CBDCs, they would be asking like why one might need it at all. So there are like kind of three reasons that are potentially compelling. One is financial inclusion, which certainly can play a role in many countries, potentially, especially the ones that were earliest ones to launch it, like Bahamas, for example. So this is one argument, maybe not like the driving force in European Monetary Union. Second one, that one can imagine some cost reduction and maintaining central banks' relevance, especially when cash usage is going down. Again, that could be a compelling reason. It's not one that I'm focusing on, and one that I am focusing on is that compared to physical cash or like various other digital means of payments, if the central banks are already kind of considering it, then why not issue one that has better features? And the question of this paper is what these better payment features could be. Okay? And what these desirable features are, and one of the key considerations, especially when asked from the public, is privacy. So it's a top public concern. This is something that has been clearly found in the surveys conducted by European Central Bank, by Bank of England, by Bank of Canada. Out of all various things that people were told that the CBDC could have in terms of features, privacy was ranking the highest. Then, of course, there is like discussions about it having like programmable features or cash plus features, smart contracts. This is something that the paper slightly touches on, which is potentially another issue. And of course, like central banks and regulators, like and they don't want to make things too private. They will be arguing that they don't want CBDC to be usable for all sorts of illicit activities like money laundering, tax evasion, and things like that, even though like physical cash obviously can be used for this sort of things. But the main thing is like, okay, what sort of digital payment system we would like, if we are free to design it whichever way we want. And the way the paper examines it, it considers like an interaction between a firm and its consumers, in the simplest version between just one firm and one consumer. And the question is that how does it distort, like how do the different choices distort like these interactions, and more key question, which aspect of privacy should be protected? Okay, so for example, the kind of approach that seems to be taken by ECB, even so nothing is fully confirmed yet, would be something that is aiming to protect small payments more than large payments. Same thing that is argued to be the case for the Chinese central bank digital currency. But this is not what I'm going to argue in this paper. Instead, I'm going to argue that one can potentially get the best of the both worlds. So just to illustrate it, we can think of like a purely private money. Some people call it token money, even so tokens are being used obviously in fintech context to mean different things. So like one can think of it, it is just like something like a cash note, whereas a note itself is something that validates payment. Okay, if I'm paying somebody with a cash, there is no sort of record about who am I and who is the firm that I pay to. So the good thing is that it gives a lot of privacy. And at the same time, it doesn't bring any sort of additional positive features that digital data could bring, for example. At the other extreme, okay, think of a bank card. Of course, a bank might protect us a little bit, but let's take it to the extreme. Another system would be super easy to design. It is just that you have people having like ID-linked accounts, the firms having ID-linked accounts, and you just record all the transactions. Good thing about this is that we can build in a lot of the features that digital records enable. At the same time, there is no privacy, and sometimes like the central banks are asking, should the CBDC resemble more token money or account-based money, or kind of like be a little bit like that, a bit private, a little bit not private, unclear. So the answer that that's a model that I present in this paper finds that actually we want like both. We want like the best features of both of the world, what one can call like intentional asymmetry of privacy, which would mean that we want to have a maximal privacy protection of the money spent and limited privacy of the money received. At least for the people that have some reasons to know it, like for example, investors to the firm, tax authorities. Doesn't mean that like everybody in the world necessarily needs to observe it, but at least like these records would exist. While maximum privacy of money spent, like ideally we don't want any digital records about like what specific product was bought by whom. And I'm gonna rationalize why it's a reason. And like I will also show and argue that like this sort of asymmetrically private system is very much like technologically possible. One can think of like the simpler tools like having payment cards that don't have name on it. So I could just load money to some card, and then we could, for extra privacy, even shuffle the cards around us and then make payments with these cards, and there will not be digital records that is associating it with a specific individual, and at the same time we can easily have records that the firm receives the payments and get all the benefits that are relevant here from the firm side. And of course I should mention in the audience there is Christian, whose company and research is also telling that from the computer science and their solutions point of view, this solution is very much like technologically possible as well. Okay, so going to the overall description, one way is that one can like kind of illustrate this privacy hybrid CBDC. Is that imagine a simple example. We have like Alice here, consumer, who wants to buy a coffee from Bob's Cafe. We can have both of them having some ID linked account to be like able to interact with the system. And then like instead of Alice like using this account money, like a bank account, to make the payment directly to Bob, Alice can turn her funds into anonymized private coins, which kind of disassociates Alice from the coins, and then makes this kind of digital payments that I described to only Bob's Cafe, so Bob's ID-linked account. So if we additionally want to not allow things like various money laundering activities, one could also make this money effectively useless if it doesn't arrive to some ID-linked account. Yeah.
You can buy a Starbucks gift card. Would that look the same? I go and buy a Starbucks gift card with my card, and then when I go to Starbucks, they pay with a Starbucks card. They don't know what account it came from.
Yeah, but like except that it is a Starbucks, so like I mean, we still know that you are then consuming coffee, so it would not be completely ideal. But if it's a card that you can, that is issued by private company, but can be used for multiple purposes.
Right, so
yeah.
It's a gift card that's not necessarily linked to a particular vendor.
Exactly.
It's a gift card that any vendor or many vendors accept.
Yeah, so like, I mean, we can issue it as a CBDC, but we could have like a big company like Amazon issuing it, and like then people buy like different things with it if you want.
So
yeah.
Amazon gift card, I can buy anything on Amazon using that gift card. Nobody knows what I'm using for that, so that works.
Yeah. So that is that would work, yeah. Okay, so this is the idea, and let me illustrate just a key trade-off. If we are like looking at the two extreme systems, and I'm gonna present a simple model rationalizing it further, that if you are using this pure token money or something like a cash or a digital equivalent that is as private as cash, so joint surplus, this is like what is the overall gain if you combine the consumers, the firms, and everybody else, is like whatever is project that the firm is producing, coffee for example, worth minus costly auditing, because the problem of not having the digital records, also in the spirit of what I was presenting earlier, in case you happen to be here, is facts that without, if we are not having like records about like the firm who is receiving money, and they need to self-declare how much they have earned, and if they are not audited, they would lie. To be as low as possible, so we need to have some auditing costs, so this is an inefficiency. With non-private account money, and I'm gonna show like specific way to modeling privacy concerns in this case. Again, we have an NPV, but we have losses due to privacy costs, and which is hybrid, this asymmetric money, would allow that at least when we have a large number of users, and we pretty much get like something which is like as efficient. So in this sense, it is not a privacy that is in between. We are kind of trying to find some sort of trade-off and place it here. We can do better than both of the systems, which is asymmetric design. Okay? And then it relates to a bunch of literature. So of course, like literatures on CBDC issuance and like issues around how it affects banks, for example. It's closer to the papers that analyze like CBDC, the design features or model privacy concerns. That is one hand. Second one is like the literature on efficient or optimal auditing in the context of both taxation and financial contracting. And it also relates to broadly models of money, and like to argue that it is not something that is overly abstract, but doable. It also links to the computer science literature and tools like zero knowledge proofs, for example, which is one way to achieve this asymmetric privacy, as well as empirical evidence about privacy concerns. Okay, so the simplest model, assume for now like that we just have one firm and one consumer, and there is a government, there is some competitive pool of investors. The firm wants to invest like some money in order to be able to produce. In the case of a successful sale, they will write a contract with like the investors before, so they offer some part of this sales to the investors. They need to pay taxes, of course. If they don't have any demand, then they don't sell anything, so we can't give money to investors nor pay taxes. Everybody takes this into account. The firm sets a price. And then the consumer is like valuing the good either not at all or at some positive value, and there is some probability that the consumer values project highly. So in this case, like there are like different choices that the consumer could have. They could pay using some non-private digital means, okay, what the consumer utilities, whatever is their valuation for the project, the price if they buy it, and minus this privacy cost, which I'm gonna elaborate on later on more, or it is just in the case of using cash or private means of payment, again, the valuation for the product minus price, or they can also decide not to buy it, and they get zero in this case. So the government will aim to provide some public goods to the consumer, so that's it. So what is happening here is that when we are using cash, so for us, the firm can set a high price. However, we need to audit the firm. Auditing costs C, so auditing choices rational according to the simple mechanism design problem here. So effectively, the firm will offer a contract that is corresponding to this expected value. So with the probability of that, the firm will get the price and has to pay to the investors and pay taxes. So we need to impose incentive compatibility. So it has to be in the interest of the firm to actually declare that they have sold something. So for that, we have to audit it with some probability. So it has to be that like payment for all these things is bigger than just getting the price and avoiding both repaying to investors and taxes. Okay, and this is like, again, optimally chosen. And investors need to break even, so they will get like, again, with the probability that they will get payment phi according to the contract. What they are lending to the investors is an investment cost. The firm doesn't have any funds in this case. And then we have the auditing costs. That depends on the fact that if the firm doesn't sell anything, we need to check that it's actually true. Auditing cost C, and the probability is gamma. So optimally setting this auditing cost here will get like that the sort of maximum commitment that the firm can be making is given by this term, which is noticeably bigger than I over Z that I'm gonna get back to. Right? And it's increasingly high if the auditing cost C is higher. Okay. On the other extreme, if we are making like the payment system not private at all, then the problem here is that the firm now needs to offer the discount to the consumers for them to be willing to buy the good to start with. At the same time, there is no need for costly auditing because we have digital records about the firm's sales. Okay, so it is very easy to offer them the contracts. This was why I said I over Z here. So we can give them like a kind of optimal investment here. But for a product that is worth less, so the firm loses it. So pretty much like as I was telling like before, we have here the case that both of these systems are bad. In one case, like we get the privacy loss. In the other case, we are paying some auditing costs. So like if we are just forced to choose between these two options, then it depends on which of these problems is more severe. And the suboptimality here is for different is also affecting this type of investments that can be financed. So not all positive NPV projects can be financed in the equilibrium. Okay? All right. So then, of course, like this setting with one consumer doesn't allow us to tell much about like the privacy, because if there would be just one individual, like, I mean, we already know who they are. So like how to model privacy and like for this, there is, of course, like simple ways some papers have taken in the literature of just assuming that for whatever reason there is some privacy cost But how do we justify that there is a privacy cost? And what I argue here is that, like, if you are observing what the consumer buys, can reveal some information about them. And what is, like, in order for clarity, important is not the fact that I'm buying coffee from Bob's Cafe, that Bob's Cafe knows whom I am. I'm going to specifically assume that Bob's Cafe could not care less, positively or negatively. There are both arguments about it, but if third parties in the economy see it, they might make some conclusions about me, and they might consequently either flood me with advertising about, like, coffee, but we can also think of all other sort of situations, even for very innocuous goods. So one could imagine that if I buy healthy bread and it is observed, people might get worried that I have health problems and charge me high insurance premium. If they see that I don't buy healthy bread, they might conclude that I don't have a healthy lifestyle and also charge me insurance premium. So overall, like, what is specific about privacy rather than good or bad types, it is a fact that the consumers would not like creditors, insurance companies, and so on, seeing their sales and making potentially inferences that go against the consumer's interest. So one way to microfound it is to think of these private characteristics of these consumers to be represented by letter A and B, whatever they mean, and assume that there are thieves in this economy who will only succeed stealing something from the consumer if their type matches. Okay, so like these thieves, of course, are not literal thieves. They are like firms that would price discriminate. So, for example, airline, if they would see about like my visits to restaurants, might price discriminate and charge me high price if they see that I'm buying expensive dinners. Okay, but at the same time, if I'm not traveling, then it's not gonna succeed. And the thieves here are gonna be like rational. So one of these thief types is there, and they will optimally decide whether to rob me or not. Okay, so what it turns out, that's a privacy loss. That emergence is like the type where the consumers would always be rather mistaken for another type. Okay, so more specifically, we can think of here like a consumer who has some utility from consuming the good. So this is like some other consumptions that they have. When they like the product, their utility is higher than the utility from not consuming it. And then, like, with some probability, there is like a thief around. The thief is gonna steal some quantity from them, and the thieves makes an optimal decision. And what is crucial here is that, like, this amount stolen corresponds to the probabilities that the thief is of matching type, conditional on the information that is available about this consumer. And of course, like, it is also depending on how costly it is to steal, that is measured with this little kappa. Okay, so what is like key here is that clearly when we are using like cash for the payments, and of course, like, there can be like some general notion about like how many people of particular disease are around. So like the thieves can still price discriminate something, but like there is no learning from the consumer's decisions. While if we would observe the precise purchasing decisions, then we can make inferences whether the consumer is more likely type A or type B. Okay. Okay, and that is gonna effectively like create a situation after we normalize variables a little bit like that. That with the cash, we have exactly this sort of payoffs that I had before. So my utility from consuming the good minus P. Okay, assuming quasi-linear preferences, like everything else I do doesn't affect my decision to buy or not buy the product. But on the no privacy or limited privacy, then like I have the same things, like how much I like the good minus the price, but like this privacy cost, like as I was telling, effectively is measured by like this difference here. So the more learning about my correct type there is, the bigger privacy loss I get, and I'd rather be mistaken for the other type. And also, as I was giving an example, that if I don't buy healthy breads, and people might make solutions as well, both purchasing and not purchasing decisions can be informative, and in the main paper I allow this like kind of intensities to differ as well. Okay, so from this, we will get like this indirect utility, and you can imagine that under this asymmetric privacy, we can still learn something. Okay, if there is just one consumer, there is no difference. But when there are like thousands of consumers, then observing the total sales a company made versus like what I particularly bought, knowing everything, a bit like in a spirit of Andrei's question before, like around like whether Starbucks card or Amazon card would work, like, yeah, so like we can learn something, but clearly a lot less when we only observe the total sales. And at the same time, you can imagine that for the firm to benefit from having better financing contracts and optimality of taxation and things like that, then the firm, it's not necessary to know to whom exactly did the firm sell. It is just enough to know how much revenues they generated. Okay, so based on that, there is a main model that does similar things that I was showing you before. It considers symmetrically private, symmetrically not private, and asymmetrically private system. It's a style that I was describing. Okay, again, we have like now several consumers and the similar situations. There is like an investment, firm offers financing, contract optimally to its investors. There is a tax policy that is being set by the government. The government and financiers, in order to not introduce additional frictions here, will like collaborate and audit as optimal. And then government will collect these funds in order to provide some public goods to the consumer. So in expectations, like we can have the government setting the tax policy to keep the government services offered fixed. Okay? Then it's again a mechanism design problem, and by the way, the reason why purchases reveal something about the consumer type is just before that one type has a slightly different propensity to like the goods than another type. Okay, so by just knowing what the consumer bought, we can never know for sure whether they are A or B, but we're going to update beliefs about it. Okay, and then again, there is a mechanism design problem. There is like a case of taxation, and like some key findings are here, like telling that from the auditing policy point of view, what we will have is that it is optimal to set the auditing probability to a constant up to some revenue, so stop auditing like the higher revenues. Same thing like for the financing contracts, and then we get like a very similar trade-offs that I had before. So this is frictions due to auditing. This is frictions due to lack of privacy. When we are like here with asymmetric privacy, we can still learn something, but you can see there is N here. There is no N here, especially if you are thinking of privacy loss per consumer. If you have a large N, then pretty much we get NPV, which is just NZ minus I. So just two last points here that like this has implications about like the contracts. So if you have different auditing costs and system when we need the firms to self-declare, then first like it can make raising external financing not possible, just because of the auditing friction. So not all projects can be financed. When they can be financed, there is a big region where it is optimal to have debt contracts. And then like when the auditing cost becomes zero, then we can have multiple financing contracts. And here are also multiple contracts, but they are not super flexible because there is still a maximum auditing threshold here. And implications for the taxes. we can see that whichever systems that we use, suppose that we want to fix some government expenditures, and we'll have like parameters such as like a frictionless market would have a tax rate of 20%. Then with symmetric lack of privacy, the tax rate needs to be higher because firm sales are lower. With asymmetric privacy, it is noticeably smaller because the cost to the firm are smaller. And when we are like having the case of symmetric privacy or the classical cash or like the traditional system, then not only does the tax need to be higher, but like if one would care about like inequalities and like because of this tax thresholds, and effectively we are taxing at the higher effective tax rates of firms that haven't been too lucky, and the effective tax rate goes down. Okay, so like even so, of course, the firms don't like to pay taxes at a macro level. Like this system allows like lower taxation. And as I mentioned, it is technologically possible via the means that I have mentioned. Okay, so to conclude, that one reason why one might want to issue a CBDC is perhaps that it could be designed to have better features. And I'm arguing that this feature should be maximally protecting consumers and benefiting from the digital records of money received. This is technologically possible, and while CBDC is one way to implement it, of course there are alternatives, because essentially the argument is about the desirable privacy features, not necessarily about who issues this particular currency. Okay, thank you.